Hello, in this video, I'm going to be discussing how you can use NetServer web service scripting events, batch processing, and web client data handlers to interact with end users who are using the web client. Let's get started. Let's review the problem we're trying to solve. When users interact with the client in a browser, let's say they create a new appointment. When they save that appointment, that's going to send a request to the web server where the request is intercepted by a data handler, which is much like a controller. The data handler will in turn use NetServer web services to persist the appointment data into the database. The website could be configured for NetServer services to be operating in local mode, which eliminates data being marshaled through web service proxies. But for the sake of this illustration, let's assume the website's configured NetServer services in the remote mode of operation and therefore sending the data to NetServer web services on another machine. This is a common scenario where customers place the website on a server in a DMZ and keep the web service endpoints in their protected network. Regardless what mode of operation NetServer services is configured, the website data handlers will still use the NetServer web service APIs and therefore will call and raise all of the web service scripting events no matter how the web client's configured. Whether set up in a local or a remote mode of operation, as long as scripting is enabled in the web config file, NetServer scripting events will be invoked. Okay, so the data handler sends the appointment entity through the web services API, and in the web services, on the application server, the scripts are invoked. Scripting events have a before events, after events, and even after async events for long-running processes. When appointments are saved in the web client uses the web services appointment agent's save method to save the appointment. The save method accepts 5 arguments. You can see them here. There's the appointment entity, the reoccurrence mode, whether or not an email should be sent to the participants, and if true, some email server information. The last argument that we see here is to be used by you, consumers of the scripts. You can set the state argument to any type you want, and that state will be passed in the subsequent events for that same method. So as shown here, anything you set to event state in the before save method, that will be passed on to the after save method. And any changes you make to the event state there will be passed on to the after save async event, which is not shown here. Now comes the real problem. How do we send any information back to the user in the browser from the events that are executing on the application server? The save event is a one-way operation. The only time the user will see a notification is if something went wrong during the save operation and the web services send an exception in a response back to the data handler. With no desire to change the client-independent web services, we have to come up with a different way to accomplish our goal of interacting with the user from NetServer scripts. So we've come up with a way to do just that. I have to say that it's fairly involved and requires writing code that people new to SuperOffice web programming might not be too familiar with. There are some great articles on our community website that discuss the concepts, as well as some other videos, and I'll make sure to include some information about those at the end of this presentation. Now, let's look at how to solve this problem. Here's an overview of the components involved. Again, we see the user, the web server, and the application server. But now we see a few new details and what's involved. Some of these are code files and some are just configuration edits. So let's go ahead and go through the workflow and see how these pieces work together and in which order. It all starts with the client invoking an action which then triggers a script event. Then there's this functionality which is referred to as batch tasks and are used by the web client to periodically conduct background operations on behalf of the current user. These types of tasks involve such things as checking for new appointment invitations and checking for new emails, things like that. Here, we're going to create a batch task plugin that allows us to store information we're going to use to interact with the user. To do that, we're going to create an intuitive UI helper library that creates these batch tasks to display messages or open dialogues and even navigate around for the user. The new data handler is going to be responsible for getting new tasks and adding their instructions to the response so that the user sees these things immediately. The user's not going to have to wait around like he does for other background tasks which run only periodically, like the invitation checks. If there is any new information, the new information is sent back to the user and the results are displayed, such as a message box or showing a custom dialogue, things like that. Finally, we need to make some modifications to the web config file to specify a custom path that tells the web client where to look for these custom configuration files and any merge files we want to include. Today we're going to be adding one merge file that will instruct the web client to include our data handler in the contact, project, and sale pages. Right now though, I'm going to start by creating a new solution with two projects. One project will contain the batch task plugin, the data handler, as well as the UI helper classes. And the second project's only going to contain the scripts that will be invoked on the application server. So let's get started. Okay, so I have Visual Studio open. I'm going to go ahead and just create File New Project. It's going to be a class library. I'm going to call it NetServer Scripting. Hit Enter. And so far I've got one solution and one project file. This project file is going to be specifically for working with contact scripts today. So anything that works inside the contact panel, which equates to the company. So I'll create a new company. So I'll call it contact. I don't have any data types available for me at this point. There's no SuperOffice libraries included. All I have is the default one. So I need to add in some SuperOffice references. So as long as you know the version of your web client, then we can use a NuGet package in order to sync up with those. So I've got the latest NuGet package up readily available on NuGet.org. So then I can easily say just install package SuperOffice, and I'll hit tab, and it'll go out and query NuGet, and it will tell me all of the available SuperOffice packages I can install. Today I'm going to be doing interacting with the services layer, so I want to work with the superoffice.netserver.services library. This will give me all of the libraries that I need in order to invoke and receive scripting events. Since all scripting events are going through the services layer, I need that services API to function. Now, through the NuGet package for the services layer, it actually depends on stuff that's in NetServer core, so it's going to also grab that package and include it for us by default, which is a good thing. So now, inside this class, I can go ahead and start to create some event handlers that I know that will be raised by the web client on the application server where NetServer Web Services resides. Let's go ahead and create an event handler for when a new contact is created. Alright, so when a new contact is created, it's going to call the Save Contact Entity method through the web services. So I need to create the prototype for that, which will be before Save Contact Entity. Let me go ahead and just paste this in. So I've got a public static void before Save Contact Entity. It's passing in the contact entity that is about to be created, and then there's also this state object that we talked about earlier. So here I need to first resolve the contact entity, and on my keyboard I'll just hit Control period, and that will give me up some options here. And I want to add in the using statement for using superoffice.crm.services. Do yourself a favor and never reference the ones with a number in it. Those are version specific and you don't want to get caught into that. Just always use the data types inside superoffice.crm.services and you'll be fine. So now you can see at the top of the file it's added a reference for superoffice.crm.services and the contact is resolved. For the workflow, what we want to do is we want to be able to detect if this is a new contact, and if it is a new contact, we want to be able to flag it so that in the after save contact entity method, we want to maybe verify some of its properties and then act on that. So what we can do here is we'll say, okay, if contact.contactID equals 0, then we're going to go ahead and set the state equal to is new. That's it. This could be a data type of our creation that's available to this library, or simple intrinsic types like numbers and strings and things like that. But now let's go ahead and create the prototype for after a save contact entity and be able to check that state property and then maybe throw up a message box. Say a public static void after save contact entity. The first parameter is the contact entity that's coming in. And if we want to make any changes to that before it gets sent back to the user, we can change the second argument, contact, and then here the state, the third argument, should be the state that we had passed in from the before event. So here inside after save contact entity, we want to cast this state object to a string, so I'll say var, let's call it local state equals state as a string. Next, we want to make sure and check that local state isn't null and check if it is new. Then we'll break down in here, and at this point, this is where we want to show a message box, right? Show a message to the user. But we haven't created that part yet, so we need to go ahead and create that part. And for that, we're going to put those components for the UI library into another project. And this project is going to be one that's going to be shared both by the web application as well as on the application server for these event handlers. So I'm going to say add a new project. This one will also be a class library. For this one, we'll call it Scripting UI library. How about we'll just go Scripting UI lib. That should be fine. For this library, we're going to need not just NetServer core, NetServer services, but also the web client libraries as well. So I'm going to go ahead and rely on a NuGet package here for this library as well. I'm going to change the target library we're using here in the package manager. And I'll say, let's see, install package superoffice.crm. And I'll hit tab. I want the last one, I want web. So what's going to happen is it's going to go out, contact NuGet, it's going to grab superoffice.core, superoffice.services, as well as superoffice.crm web library, which contains the ones we're most interested in here for this one. The ones we're most focused in on is CRM web, DCF, and DCF web. Those are the main libraries that we're really concerned about. The rest of them are going to be included in the web application, so that's perfectly fine. Here I'm going to delete this class 1 library. I'm going to create a folder. Just going to say add a new folder. And for this one, I'm going to say batch tasks. I'm going to create another folder for the UI library. And for the UI library, I'll just call it UI. So we want to be able to show messages to the user. In order to do that, we need to create batch tasks. So the first thing I'm going to do is come into batch tasks and create a new batch task plugin. So I'll say new item class, code, class, plugin. Almost all plugins require an attribute, and this one is just like that. The attribute for this is called batch task. This kind of signals to NetServer that says, hey, this class is special. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control period or Shift Alt F10 to bring this up. It knows how to resolve this type since it's in one of the reference libraries. And I want to select the first option here, using superoffice.crm.batchProcessing. Now you can see that the batch task is resolved. I'm going to give it a name property, which is the only required one. And for this one, we're going to call it scripts batch plugin. Just like that. Actually, let's for the class, we have to inherit from the batch task base. Don't have to, but it's the best option so that we don't actually have to do it ourselves. So batch task base, that resides inside another namespace, batch processing.tasks. So we'll go ahead and just add that in there as well. We need to go ahead and implement the run method, so I'll go ahead and Control Shift or Shift Alt F10 again, and just allow it to implement the interface for me, which is just for run. Now, obviously, when this batch task runs, we don't want to throw an exception. All we really want to do is return true. For the other batch tasks that are out there, specifically the one that checks for new appointments, the one that checks for new emails, things like that, this is where that runs. It runs inside this run statement. But since we don't actually have anything to do here, all we're doing is creating a batch task type so that we can create batch tasks of that type, which get persisted to the database. And we're going to handle all of the run events through our data handlers. So here we don't really need that, so we're just going to go ahead and return true. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. Let's see, I'm just going to go ahead and call that script batch plugin. And that's all that's necessary for this guy. Now we want to work on that UI library that's going to be able to create batch tasks of this type. So for that, I'm going to go and right click on the UI folder, choose add a new item. It's going to be a new class. And for this one, we're going to create actually a couple different classes. Now, since we want to show a message box, let's go ahead and call this one a message box. And we'll use this one. I'm going to make a couple changes here and we'll come right back. Okay, so I went ahead and made the message box class public. I've created two public static methods here. One for showing an information dialog and also for presenting a yes/no dialog. Something that people can ask a question to, click on yes or no, and then we're going to include this callback script that we can go ahead and add in a callback script that will exist on the web client that will handle the yes or no response. Now what we need to do is create a helper class that will insert batch tasks into the batch task table. So let's go ahead and create that helper now. I'm going to go ahead and say add new item. This one I'm going to call batch task helper. And give me a few minutes to fill this in. Okay, so I've made a couple changes here. I'm going to instead use this class as an abstract class that the other classes will inherit from. So I'll call it UI batch task base. I'm going to make it abstract. I have one protected method here called add UI entry. Inside here I'm going to pass in a string which is going to be the response that gets sent back to the web client. So to create batch tasks, we have to create a batch task info type, give it a name, which is going to equal the name of our batch task that we created earlier. Something I'm going to do right now just to sort of clean this up is I'm going to change this, the way that this is actually constructed a little bit. Instead of giving it a name directly, so I'm going to give it a public const string name equal to that script batch plugin. Then what I can do is up here is just reference that name directly. So then we can say script batch plugin dot name, and that will be suffice. And what I can use here, instead of actually worrying about making some spelling mistakes later, is use this directly here when I'm adding in new UI statements. Let me get that pop-up out of the way. There we go. All I gotta do is add that reference above to our batch tasks, and then that will resolve correctly. Don't want name in there, that's good. Okay, we'll create a batch task info type, give it a name equal to our batch task name. We're going to save this to the database, and then we're going to, well, this actually just packages it up, saves it, gives us back an ID, and then we're going to set the response and then call update batch task using the batch data type. Update batch task. That stores it in the database and puts in the response that's going to get sent back to the client. So let's go ahead and save that. And now we're going to go back to our UI message box library here, and then we're going to inherit from that batch task helper. I think it was UI batch task base. There we go. Public. There. That's resolved. And now that will allow us to just call add UI method here from inside this library. And we want to, in this case, open up an information dialog. By adding in a UI entry, we'll pass in this string, which allows us to format the string to include the title and the message. So it's just going to be a dialog.information, which already exists in JavaScript in the web client. It's part of the SuperOffice web client libraries. We'll pass in the title and a message, and that will add a batch task of type script batch task with this response. So this is the response that will actually be sent to the user. And then the user will see a dialog information box with the title and the message that we passed in here. Let's go ahead and simply fill in the yes or no one as well, and then we'll continue. Okay, as you can see in the yes and no, it accepts the same as above, a title and a message, but now we expect to be able to pass in a callback. And in the web client's JavaScript libraries, the yes and no accepts 4 parameters actually, but I know for this case we don't actually pass in the third one. We're not going to pass in the fourth one. The fifth one is the callback, and then nothing necessarily for the sixth one. That's going to be fine. All we need is a title, a message, and a callback. So now what we need to do is create the class for the data handler. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a new folder. We'll call this one data. We're going to add in a new class. And we're going to call this one script UI data handler. Data handlers also need an attribute in order to be discovered by the web client. So all we need to do is add in an attribute called SOWebObject. Let's go ahead and resolve this. It's inside the superoffice.dcf.web.factory namespace. I'll go ahead and enter to add that into the namespaces above. And then we need to give it a name. So in this case, we'll call it script UI data handler. Easy peasy. All data handlers, there is a base type in order to interact with those. It's called data handler base. And we also need to be discovered as a iWeb object. So we're also going to implement the iWeb object interface, which actually doesn't have any methods at all. What's this complaining about? Circular dependencies. Oh, right. This is the wrong thing to inherit from. We want to inherit from data handler base. That's inside dcf.web.data. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and do a bit of cleanup. Don't need that in here. Not yet anyway. So now that we have the data handler object, what we want to be able to do is override when certain things happen. We want to be able to override when new contacts are created, but also what happens if somebody edits a contact, and then we want to be able to intercept that with a before save event. So we'll actually override two different types here that are in the base. We'll do a public override. The first one that we're going to override is the on before data bind, and then also on the save event. Now the save event actually returns an object, so we need to return something. So here we're not actually going to be doing anything, so we're not going to be saving a contact entity or a sale entity. It's really just to pass information to the client. So what we can do is it expects an object, so we can just go ahead and create an object. This null is fine, and then we'll return the returned object. And that should work out just fine. When this method executes, I'm always in a habit of calling the base. So we'll just go ahead and call save base in case there's anything going on there. And then we want our logic here to check for new batch tasks and show them to the user. So we want to do that here, and we also want to do that up here. So let's go ahead and create the helper method to look up batch tasks. And here, I'm going to go ahead and just paste it from the clipboard. We're going to be using the agent, the batch agent. Again, I'll resolve the namespace for all these types. Okay, and down here we're using the page class from system.web.ui and also the HTTP context. So for that, I need to also add a reference to the system.web class or library. That's going to be in assemblies, system.web. Here we go. Add that. That should be all. It still doesn't want to resolve that type, so let's just go ahead and type it in system.web.http handler. Well, let's just take it away. There. Context. It's right there. F6, enter. Interesting. Never experienced that so much before. Okay, so now we've got those up there. So in our data handler, we're overriding the on before data bind. We're overriding the save. And down below, we've got this method to check for batch tasks. In there, we're using the batch agent and saying, hey, give me all batch task infos by name and state. And here we're going to go ahead and use the script batch plugin name, but of course we can just use the types constant. So let's go ahead and do that because it is included here inside this library. So we just need, was it script UI lib .batch tasks .batch task plugin .name. So there we go. We'll just use that. And state is unknown. So then we'll get back a collection, potentially, of batch task infos. We're going to go ahead and loop through each one of those and get out the responses. And we're going to add those just to a string builder. And let's see, the IDs, we're going to go ahead and add those to an IDs collection, because what's going to happen is we're going to take the string builder, we're going to register that as a startup script and put that out to the HTTP context in that current handler. So that's going to write it out to the browser and invoke it immediately for the current user. And then we're going to use the IDs in order to delete those batch tasks so they don't run again. So then we'll say on the batch agent, call off the delete batch tasks and clean that up. So then we can just go ahead and say check for batch tasks, and we'll put that here for the on before data bind, and we'll also put it here in the save method, overriding the save. There. Clean that up a little bit. Alright, and that comes pretty much full circle. So let's go ahead and take a review of how this code should work. The client's doing something, creating a new contact or editing an existing contact. When he hits the save button, it's going to go ahead and fall in here. It's going to check to see if it's a new contact. If it is, it's going to set the state property to is new. And then afterwards, it falls into the after save contact entity. We'll go ahead and check the state here and see if it is new. And if it is, we want to show a message box. Now, the message box functionality exists down here in the script UI library. So I'm going to create a reference to that here. It's a project. So I'll share that. Say OK. And now, here we should be able to say something like, is it script UI lib .ui .messagebox .information. We'll say the title of the card is going to be hello, and then the message is going to be congratulations, you a new company, just like that. So here we go. We're going to send in a message box, say hello. So let's go ahead and follow this through. Inside information, it's going to add a new UI entry, which is a dialog, information dialog. If we step into the add UI entry, it's going to create a new batch task of that batch task plugin name. Set the response equal to what we set it here, which is going to be dialog.information, etc., etc. And then we're going to update that batch task. So now that's inside the database. So when control returns back to the web site, the data handler will be invoked. And if it was a new company, on before data bind is going to be called. But if it's editing a new company, the save method will be called. Now, we're not going to actually show anything for save because we set this contact just to contact is new. So now we're only going to detect new contacts. So here inside the data handler, it's going to check for batch tasks in the on before data bind method. It's going to query the database to get all new batch tasks of that type, our script batch task plugin type. And for each one it finds, it's going to go ahead and write that out as a script to the client, and therefore the client will see the message box appear immediately when this data handler returns. Let's go ahead and set this up and execute this inside the web client. Before we go off in the web application and see how this actually executes, I want to go over all of the configuration points to show and demonstrate how to actually fit all this together. So with our two libraries, NetServer Scripting and Scripting UI lib, we have to copy these binaries out to locations that the web client can pick up and use. So for our scripts, for the contact scripts, we're going to put those into a folder called web scripts on the C root. To do that, I'm just using a simple copy operation. I'm also doing the same thing for the script and UI library, but what I'm doing here is putting them into the website's bin directory. Right, so the script UI library we want to be able to leverage from the website itself. So I'll just copy that over there. You'll see in this copy I'm actually doing a dot star because I want to copy both the DLL and its PDB file so that I can debug into it. Okay, so with those two binaries copied over, we need to modify the web config file for the website itself. You'll see in the dynamic load section here, I've added in the script in UI lib DLL so that NetServer can discover that this library exists and contains plugins that we want to load up, specifically the batch task plugin and the data handlers. And then we're going to enable scripting. I'm going to set that to true and tell the web application it can find our scripts here in the web scripts folder. Timeout is going to be 20 seconds. The idea is that this is milliseconds here, so if the scripts don't finish executing in 20 seconds, they'll be terminated. And then it can continue to retry to execute that same script 5 times in a row before it removes it from the queue of executing scripts. Next, we're going to make sure that we enable batch tasks. Specifically, we're going to modify the run task and process and set that to false. We want to be able to offload the handling of batch tasks into the Windows service that's installed automatically when we install the web application. So you can see I've had a few web installations already, but the only one running is the latest one for my web application right now, which is SuperOffice 8 Service Release 1. Okay. Now that that's running out of process and in the Windows service, there's only one more thing left to configure, and that's down here a little bit further in the client configuration section. We have to be able to modify some of the configuration files that exist. For example, when we want to handle anything with a data handler that's tied to the contact page when a new company is created or updated, we need to be able to insert our own data handler there. To do that, we're going to use a merge file. Merge files are merged with the existing configuration files that pretty much make up the entire website. I recommend when you're developing, you also set cache configuration to false. This will eliminate your requirement to always put flush into the browser's address bar and execute that so that it flushes the caches. If we say cache configuration to false, it's just going to go ahead and parse those configuration files every single request and makes the development and debugging of this much easier. So in custom path, web customization, custom files, let's go ahead and take a look there. I have a folder, and it does have to meet this requirement. It does have to contain a folder called web client, which will contain another folder called web, and inside there will be our merge files that we want to play with. Specifically, which one I'm interested in now is the script UI merge file. You can see it's going to be merged in with the contact page. We're going to add in our script UI data handler up here at the top inside the data section. And because we also want our data handler to be called when updates are being saved for specific companies or all companies, we're going to have to add our data handler here into the data handlers to save element. Now, we do have to add in an ID here, although it's not required by the data handlers that are already there. The reason why the ID is required here is in order for the merge engine to be able to discover it and insert it into the right location, into the destination. Let's go ahead and take a look at the web application itself now and see how these configuration files appear. We can do that here with the web application, and we look at the diagnostics page, diagnostics.aspx. If we if we're logged into the web application, now we can go ahead and look at the diagnostics page, and we can see the configurations as they exist. For example, the contact page, if I select that one, you can see the configuration page that makes up the entire contact page. And now that I've enabled those things in the configuration files in the web config file to pick up the custom path, you can now see down here, here's the data handlers data section, here's the data handlers collection, a lot of data handlers in order to handle the contact, but now you can see that our script UI data handlers also picked up and inserted here as well. If we go down even further, let me see, we want to look for the data handlers to save method, we can see ours is being inserted here as well. By default, you'll have the contact entity data handlers responsible for saving any of the contact information, and that includes updates. But it doesn't include an ID, and it doesn't necessarily need one. But ours does, so that the merge engine again can understand where exactly to put this. This only works in the configuration file. If we did not have this ID, the merge engine would not be able to insert our data handler reference here, even if we used a merge instruction. So now that we know that the data handlers are being inserted into the configuration, overall configuration, we come back to the client, and then we can go ahead and start to make new companies and see how the scripts work. To see how the scripts work, I'm going to go ahead into the script page, and I'm going to set a breakpoint, the events that we've hooked into, the before save contact entity and after save contact entity. I'm going to go ahead and go under the debug menu inside Visual Studio, choose attach to process. I'm going to scroll down and find the app pool that's running my web application. I know that it's the right one. I've loaded it up, and then I can see my breakpoints have resolved, so I know that that's being picked up. I'm going to go into the scripting UI library also and set a breakpoint into the onBeforeDataBind method and also the save method. Now inside the SuperOffice application, we want to be able to test this, so I'm just going to say new. We're going to create a new company, and we see that the data handlers onBeforeDataBind method's being called. I'm just going to F5 to continue past that. It allows me to start typing in, so I'll say NetServer scripting events demo company. I'll just go ahead and save. And now we drop into our first event handler for the before save contact entity. It's going to look to see if the contact ID equal to 0, which it is. So it's going to set the state to is new. Then I'm just going to go ahead and continue. Step over that. Now it falls into the after save contact entity. Now the contact has actually been saved. So now we can see, let's go a little bit further into it. Local state, it is new, so now it's dropped in and it wants to insert this message box. The in contact is 0, the out contact, his ID is 136. So this was the contact that we had created above, and then the out contact is the one that actually was created by the database, and you can see now it has a contact ID equal to 136. So we're going to go in and step into this message box information. So I'm going to hit F11 to do that. We're going to go here into the add UI entry method, which now we're going to insert a batch task which includes this JavaScript to show a dialog information box. Here we're going to go ahead and create the batch task info. It's saved it, it's given me back an ID. We've set the response to the dialog.information. And you can see the information that was passed in. Hello, congratulations, you have a new company. And now we're going to go ahead and update that. So we'll step out of there, and now we're coming into the onBeforeDataBind method. It's going to check to see if there's any batch tasks here inside the data handler. So So it's going to call the batch agent. It's going to look. It finds 1 in our array. It's going to go ahead and cycle through them. It's going to append the line to the response. And here it's going to call client script, register the startup script, and it's going to write out our JavaScript. Then it's going to clean up the batch tasks afterward. I'm going to go ahead and just F5 to go past all this. I'm going to go ahead and write it out to the response. And now we can see, congratulations, you have a new company. Great, thanks. So often what people want to do from this point is to be able to detect when something happens. Say if they edit the company, for example, if I choose simple edit, the department field, and I say save, the contact ID is no longer 0, so it's really not going to register anything. I'll just F5 past there. You'll see in the after event, nothing happens because local state is not set to is new. Afterwards, it checks for new badge tasks. There are none to show to this user, so nothing really happens. So how do we go ahead and tap into the edit button? For that, we'll come right back into Visual Studio, and I'm going to disable the debugger, come back into our script, and say, okay, well, I don't know, but let's just assume that the contact ID is not 0. So then we're going to say, okay, state there we go. Now if it's updated, we'll go ahead and put in another information dialog. Updated. Congratulations. You have updated company, and then let's actually pass in some data. It's just an extension method, and then here we can say pass in contact dot name, for example. It should work. I'll just rebuild this. We'll see an error down here. Expect this because the scripting library is being hosted by the web application, so the process has a lock on it. So what we'll have to do is an administrator prompt, just do an IIS reset in order to set the reset that state. Obviously you wouldn't do this in production. This is just for test purposes in a development environment. Rebuild the solution. All the error messages are cleared. Our copy commands had executed correctly now. If we come back to web application, we should have the prompt to log back in. I'm not going to hook up the debugger at this point. We'll just go ahead and let it run. Okay, we're logged back in. We see our company. I'm going to go ahead and task, edit. I'll just say new edit. Click on save. And now we can say it does function as we expect. Congratulations, you've updated company, NetServer scripting events demo company. So that's how you can leverage data handlers, scripting events, and interact with the users from NetServer services scripts. So just a quick review, what we've done is created a script batch task plugin that implements the iBatch task interface. We've actually just inherited from the base class, so that worked out really well. And this enables us to register batch tasks of that type. Next, we've created a script UI plugin helper library that makes it easy to interact with the user. It's an easy API for showing message boxes, dialogues. I've even included some methods to show you how to do some navigation for the users and inject your own JavaScript. It uses the batch task system in order to be able to interact with the user. 3 elements in here. There's the script batch plugin, there's the script UI library, and the script UI data handler. And finally, we have the actual script UI data handler that checks for pending script batch tasks, executes them, registers them using the client script registration, and then cleans up any events so that they don't get executed again. For the Script UI plugin, it's got helper libraries for showing dialogues. This includes custom dialogues, message boxes, even those for yes or no, where you can instruct for a JavaScript callback method. And that way you will be able to know if your user clicked yes or no. And there's also some information in there to show you how to navigate around for the user, as well as add in your custom scripts. Finally, the configuration, we had to update the configuration file for batch tasks. All we had to do is set run task and process to false. This is actually a good thing because it offloads a lot of the tasks that might take a long time to happen and doesn't wear down your web application process for things like checking users' email to see if there's new emails, writing reports, publishing reports, things like that. We enable scripting in the web config file as well. We specified the web clients or the web scripts folder. We added a custom path to get the merge files so that those merge settings would be merged with the root configuration. We've added the Script UI DLL to the dynamic load section of the web application in the web config. And if you need to, you can go ahead and add in some script files into the web scripts folder and have those referenced as well. So that's it. That's how you interact with the web client users from your event scripts. So hope it helps you with the success of your installation. Have a great day.